Hi everyone, and welcome to our weekly and what is our first edition for 2024 of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by Tim Miller. G'day Tim, how are you?
Aaron, I'm going very well for the start of 2024. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
Well, it is the season for indexation when we think about superannuation, and naturally things like wages growth and inflation are certainly hot topics inside the economy generally, and this naturally translates into superannuation as well. And in that regard, we have to consider both of those in the context of various superannuation caps. So Tim, I'll get you to maybe kick off here and share some insights into the importance of both CPI and AWOTE in the context of these different superannuation caps.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Look, I guess it's that time of year where SMSF nerds like you and I get a little bit edgy, a little bit excited to see sort of what lays ahead in January and February as they release the December figures or the November figures, subject to what you're looking at there for CPI and for average weekly ordinary times earnings. And what we know is that those two numbers are utilised for many of the caps that we use in the superannuation system, and you know each is done for a different purpose or whatever, and so we like to look at this time of year to see whether we're going to get indexation, because then it can become sort of a critical point as we move into the planning for ultimately the last quarter of the financial year and into what the future holds.
Yeah, and last year, of course, we saw through what was a raging inflation figure, a double jump to the transfer balance cap, and therefore naturally the impact that it had on the ability to make non-concessional contributions. But we fell somewhat just short, I think, from a wages point of view, where we didn't see the concessional cap increase. Now, this appears as though it might end up transpiring that we'll see a concessional cap increase from the 1st of July this year. But I guess from my interest to you, and the question that I have here is understanding, if we do actually see these AWOTE figures grow in the first instance, what are we then likely to see from a cap change within the superannuation laws and income tax laws?
Yeah, well, I guess probably the first thing. So with the AWOTE one, which is linked to most of our contribution style caps as such, I guess the key one that we all look out for every year is the concessional contribution cap, because it's the hardest one, because it's the lowest number. It's the hardest one to index, even though we're only indexing it in instances of $2,500. We need to get over and above that. So when you start at a low base of 25,000, to get to that 27.5, you need to get a bit of a kick up, and then the same with 30,000. So a lot of the other caps that we've seen historically, because you're starting with numbers in excess of often $100,000, the indexation is not too difficult to achieve. But certainly with the concessional cap, it's been significant. And of course, the flow on from the concessional cap. So if we move from 27.5 to 30, is that the flow on is that the non-concessional cap is then representative of 4 times the concessional. So we would see a jump from 110 to 120, which then of course has that flow on of increasing the bring forward contribution limit that you can make over a 3-year period. So there's the key issue of indexation that we look for, but then there's the other issues around things like the CGT lifetime limit, which I think at the moment is like $1.705 million. So get that capacity to increase contributions under that, but also then a number of other things like the maximum contribution base for employer contributions, amongst other changes like government co-contributions and the like.
And then on the flip side, of course, we have our inflationary impact, so CPI. And as I mentioned before, we saw that pretty profound jump last year to a couple of those. And again, whether we see that this year or not, we would arguably just need to wait and see. We don't see inflation running anywhere near the pace that it was previously. Equally, I think, Tim, the other part here is understanding what is moving in line with wages or inflation, and those that aren't. And this is where somewhat you'd argue it's a bit of policy on the run with some of these examples that we do currently see, where we have different rules applying TSB thresholds that are linked to inflation or not linked to inflation. So maybe again, just sharing a couple of insights into some of the traps that people could fall into through these threshold adjustments.
Yeah, and look, and whether we're talking the CPI index factors or the AWOTE ones, again, sort of what I would reference there is when you look at something like the general transfer balance cap, which is indexed in accordance with CPI, that's great in the sense that that we have seen the movement, and we got the double kick with up to $1.9 million. There was obviously the anomaly of when AWOTE and CPI indexed at the same time, and we got the increase in the concessional caps and the general transfer balance cap. But of course, the general transfer balance cap is often, and there's a bit of a misunderstanding, I guess, that it's often linked to the concept of total superannuation balance. And a number of the links to indexation, then we reflect on things like, okay, well, if the general transfer balance cap is about commencing pensions, why isn't there then a change or an uplift in the total super balance for qualifications for things like the carry forward concessional contributions or the work test exemption for those over 67 wanting to claim a personal tax deduction with less than $300,000. So there's these sort of weird anomalies in the legislation, and probably the weirdest one for most of us is the concept of disregarded small fund assets, which of course was linked exclusively to starting a pension when the general transfer balance cap was $1.6 million, but they hardwired the legislation to say that disregarded small fund assets was fixed at $1.6 million with regards to your capacity to segregate or not. So, there's some weirdness to the way the legislation operates, and it can create a lot of confusion. But it's confusion that we've existed with for a long time, because the CGT retirement exemption was set at $500,000 many moons ago, and still sits equally at $500,000 today.
Yeah, and that's how I made that comment before. Some of it is a little bit of policy on the run, and that was certainly the case in that disregarded small fund asset space. But I think you've equally shown there examples of where we've got rates that are linked to AWOTE, ultimately carry forward concessional contributions that have been unused, but then equally the disregarded small fund assets, which would be linked to the inflationary adjustments that we see in a general transfer balance cap point of view as well. Now, the other part to this was that by and large, we would like to see a much greater simplification of thresholds that we would need to deal with. Now, we did see that in an SMSF context. We had the removal of our hardwired $1 million threshold. That was another one that we had for T-bar purposes. But we are going to see another threshold ultimately disappear from the 1st of July this year too.
Yeah, and look, and this one, if I do it with a bit of an anecdote attached to it, and that is, you talk about policy on the run with the CGT cap being set at $500,000. The other oddity of the CGT cap is that it's linked to age 55, which of course at the time it was introduced was preservation age. So it means that you can actually sell your asset between 55 and 60 and take that money out and not have to be forced to put it into super. And of course, the key thing that occurred between 55 and 60 was the superannuation low rate cap, which was the amount of the taxed element that you could receive tax-free effectively, or get your rebate on from a lump sum withdrawal point of view. And ultimately, from the 1st of July 2024, that cap becomes redundant because preservation age moves to 60, and people won't have access to lump sum withdrawals prior to that age, except under early release, where the low rate cap doesn't apply.
Yeah, well, these are all, I guess, insights that we are not only going to be sharing at our SMSF Day event, as we obviously will naturally get some of those CPI and AWOTE figures in play. But Tim, one of the things that we're going to be doing to kick off this year is we've put together our State of SMSF for 2024. There is a lot that is going on within the sector, and I think today's session just highlights some of the, I guess, impacts that we're seeing in the economy and the flow-on effects that it has within superannuation. And we know the government has a number of fires in the oven from a legislative point of view, from an advice and regulatory standpoint. So these are all things that Tim and I are going to be packaging together in this upcoming free CPD webinar on the state of SMSFs. at 2024. So you can go onto our website and you can register for this free CPD event. Tim, thank you once again for contributing to this week's Feeling Smarter.
No worries, Aaron. I look forward to catching up next week.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. Bye for now.
Bye all.